Hello everybody, welcome to Twangy Reads. Tonight we're going to be reading The Frog King or Iron Heinrich. In the olden times, when wishing still helped, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that even the sun, who had seen many things, was filled with wonder every time he shone upon her face. Not far from the king's palace there was a great dark forest, and under an old lime tree in the forest there was a spring. When the weather was very hot, the princess went out to the forest and sat near the edge of the cool spring. And when the time hung heavy on her hands, she took a golden ball and threw it into the air and caught it. It was her favorite plaything. One day it so happened that when she held out her little hand to catch the ball passed it by, fell to the ground, and rolled straight into the water. The princess followed the ball with her eyes, but it disappeared, and the spring was deep, so deep that you couldn't see the bottom. She began to cry. She cried louder and louder. She was inconsolable. As she was lamenting, someone called out to her, "What's the matter, princess?" "Why, to hear you wailing, a stone would take pity." She looked to see where the voice came from and saw a frog sticking his big, ugly head out of the water. "Oh, it's you, you old splasher," she said. "I'm crying because my ball has fallen into the spring." "Stop crying," said the frog. "I believe I can help you, but what will you give me if I bring your plaything?" "Anything you like, dear frog," she said. "My clothes, my beads, my jewels, even the golden crown I'm wearing." The frog replied, "I don't want your clothes, your beads and jewels, or your golden crown, but if you will love me, if you will let me be your companion and playmate, and sit at your table, and eat from your golden plate, and drink from your golden cup, and sleep in your bed, if you promise me that, I'll go down and fetch your golden ball." "Oh yes," she said, "I promise you anything you want, if only you'll bring me my ball." But she thought, "What nonsense that silly frog talks. He lives in the water with other frogs and croaks. How can he be a companion to anybody?" Once the frog had her promise, he put his head down and dived, and in a little while he came swimming back to the surface. He had her golden ball in his mouth and tossed it on the grass. When she saw her beautiful plaything, the princess was very happy. She picked it up and ran off with it. "Wait, wait," cried the frog. "Take me with you. I can't run like you." He croaked and he croaked at the top of his lungs, but it did him no good. The princess didn't listen. She hurried home and soon forgot the poor frog. There was nothing he could do but go back down into his spring. The next day, when she sat down at the table with the king and all his courtiers, and was eating from her golden plate, something came hopping, plip plop, up the marble steps. When it reached the top, it knocked at the door and cried out, "Princess, youngest princess, let me in." She ran to see who was there, and when she opened the door, she saw the frog. She closed the door as fast as she could and went back to the table. She was frightened to death. The king saw that her heart was going pit-a-pat, and she said, "What are you afraid of, my child? Is there a giant outside come to take you away?" "Oh no," she said, "it's not a giant, but only a nasty frog." "What does the frog want of you?" "Oh, father dear, yesterday when I was playing beside the spring in the forest, my golden ball fell in the water, and because I was crying so, the frog got it for me. And because he insisted, I promised he could be my companion I never thought he'd get out of his spring. And now he's outside and wants to come in after me." Then the frog knocked a second time and cried out, "Princess, youngest princess, let me in. Don't you remember what you promised yesterday? By the cool spring, princess, youngest princess, let me in." Then the king said, "When you make a promise, you must keep it. Just go and let him in." She went and opened the door. The frog hopped in and followed close at her heels. Then he sat and cried out, "Lift me up beside you." She didn't know what to do, but the king ordered her to obey. Once the frog was on her chair, he wanted to be on the table. Once he was on the table, he said, "Now push your golden plate up closer to me so we can eat together." She did as he asked, but anyone could see she wasn't happy about it. The frog enjoyed his meal, but almost every bite stuck in the princess's throat. Finally, he said, "I've had enough to eat, and now I'm tired, so carry me to your room and prepare your silken bed. Then we'll lie down and sleep." The princess began to cry. She was afraid of the cold frog. She didn't dare touch him, and now he wanted to sleep in her lovely clean bed. But the king grew angry and said, "He helped you when you were in trouble, and you mustn't despise him now." Then she picked him up between thumb and forefinger, carried him upstairs, and put him down in a corner. But when she lay down in the bed, he came crawling over and said, "I'm tired. I want to sleep as much as you do. Pick me up, or I'll tell your father." At that, she grew very angry, picked him up, and dashed him against the wall with all her might. "Now you'll get your rest, you nasty frog." But when he fell to the floor, he wasn't a frog any longer. He was a king's son with a beautiful smile, smiling eyes. And her father's bidding, he became her dear companion and husband. He told her that a wicked witch had put a spell on him, and that no one but she alone could have freed him from the spring, and that would go to his kingdom together the next day. Then they fell asleep, and in the morning when the sun woke them, a carriage drove up, drawn by 8 white horses and golden harnesses, with white ostrich plumes on their heads, and behind it stood the young king's servant, the faithful Heinrich. Faithful Heinrich had been so sad when his master was turned into a frog that he had 3 iron bands forged around his heart to keep it from bursting with grief and sadness. The carriage had come to take the young king back to his kingdom. Faithful Heinrich lifted the 2 of them in and sat down again and back. Overjoyed that his master had been set free, when they had gone a bit of the way, the prince heard a cracking sound behind him. As though something had broken, he turned around and cried out, "Heinrich, the carriage is falling apart." "No, master, it's only an iron ring. I had it forged around my heart, for fear that it would break in two. When struck by a cruel magic, you were turned to a frog in a forest spring." Once again, and yet once again, the cracking was heard, and each time the king's son thought the carriage was falling to pieces, but it was only the bands snapping and falling away from faithful Heinrich's heart, because his master had been set free and was happy. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, leave a like and subscribe.